And I think when you frame the $750 medical procedure as a kind of a hedge against a $250,000 expense, it starts to feel more like an investment and not some attack on your manhood or philosophy around children in general. It's just kind of like, this feels like it feels like term life insurance. Like it feels like a no-brainer.
I mean, honestly, I'm going to ruin this, but like it's no different than you being willing to invest in like an alarm system in your home or, some add-on in your yard just to make sure that you don't have the likelihood of some issue downstream, right? So to your point, that's really, I think, the way from a financial perspective.
Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast presented by Success, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Julien. And today's episode is about my experience getting a vasectomy.
All right. Getting personal.
Nice, light, and fun time.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot to cover on this one.
And we weren't originally planning on recording this. We had a different episode for y'all next week. Or this week. It was going to be about the recession. But then, Yeah,
I've got like 2 to 3 other episodes, in my mind around what we want to talk about just based on topics that are, on our minds or conversations that we've had with people. But we did have this experience in our personal lives, and I posted about it on social media, and it got such a incredible response. I was like, you know what, maybe we should talk about this because there is a financial implication. So at the time, my thoughts in the caption of the post on Instagram, if you follow us there, I sort of wrapped up my rationale around 3 key points. The first one being we're one and done, right? We've had one child. We're good with that. Our son has plenty of cousins here in Atlanta, cousins in Texas, New York, you name it, all around the country that he can play with. We do not have to have another child in order for him to, feel like he's got someone to play with, or for us to feel complete in any way. Like we feel really great with just having one child. The second one was also just recognizing the limited set of options that were available to us now that Roe v. Wade was overturned earlier this summer. And so if we were to think about that happening, obviously, there used to be a number of options, many of which fell on the backs of the woman. And now that that is not an option, I felt like this is something that I should do, not even just from a standpoint of solidarity with women's rights, but more so just from a standpoint of like, well, this is what I think is best for our family. And then the last one is really something that is something that I've struggled with for a really long period of time, but it's really about the idea of role modeling. And when we think about role modeling from a standpoint of money and personal finance and masculinity or male image and all of those things, it's something that I have really been paying attention to, quite honestly, for like the last 2 decades. And I recognize the role that I play in a lot of men's lives. And I felt no need to like isolate sort of the role that I play as a mentor or leader in this regard. It was like, all right, well, this is an issue over here. If I have somehow found the courage, which again, I don't even think this is something that requires courage, just being honest, but I know that a lot of men see it that way. And so I felt like, all right, this is something that I want to help normalize, talk about, maybe bust a couple of myths, but also help people just kind of add it to the consideration set, just like everything else, right? Like, I don't care what you do with your money, quite honestly, but I do want to make sure, and I do have some sense of responsibility around saying, hey, well, these are some options for you, right? You don't have to do it, but I do want to make sure that you guys know that it's available. So
I remember when you told me you were posting it on Instagram, and I was like, what? Like, why would you do that? And then about 5 minutes into writing the caption, you were like, should we do a podcast on this? And I was like, absolutely not. And then I saw all of the reactions and I was like, okay, maybe you're onto something. Like maybe we should.
Yeah, we should.
We have to. I was definitely surprised at quite a bit of the experience, which is why I think it's good that we're talking about it. The first surprise or insight was just how you were a little shell shocked after the procedure. And like you were like immediately regretting it just after. And I realized that there is just a vast difference between the healthcare routines that men have versus women. Girls start seeing OBGYNs and specialized care doctors as early as 13, sometimes even earlier. So we're kind of used to being poked and prodded. But after you came home, I realized there really isn't a male equivalent until you're much older. And I can imagine how foreign the experience was for you, which is why you were kind of shell shocked.
That was a part of it.
Yeah, we'll get to the details in just a minute. But to your point, I was also surprised about how many people thought you were a hero or brave for sharing your story.
I know.
I just feel like women talk about birth control all the time with very little fanfare. So again, it's important that we start to normalize these conversations with men, among men and women, to talk about the options that everybody has available to them. And then generally speaking, after having talked to you for the last couple of days, I was really surprised about how little information there was out there for men who may be interested, which I'm sure we'll get into.
I will offer a little bit of a disclaimer. I don't know where this conversation is going to go. And so if there are some kids listening and you would prefer that they don't hear some of the terms that you suspect may come out of this conversation, then now's a pretty good time to press pause and maybe put on something
put your headphones in.
Playful.
If you at work playing this in your
this is not one you want to put out on the big speaker. So go ahead and pop in an AirPod or put on some headphones. But I also think, it's important, again, if I want to be relatable, is to be as natural as possible. So if it sounds like I'm being a little crass, then it is what it is. But that's how I felt or am describing the experience or anything related to it. So, yeah.
All right. So this podcast is going to be a little bit different because this is Julien's story. As much as I think I can talk for him in this situation, I cannot. So he'll be doing the bulk of the talking. I'll ask a couple of questions here and there. And of course, you will hear me chime in to add in financial layers or any other insights. But I think we should start at the top. You kind of explained this a little bit, but why did you ultimately choose to get a vasectomy?
Yeah. So there were a couple of things that I had mentioned to your point where we're team one and done, we're good with that. Yeah. But I think even when I just think about our lifestyle and where things are going and the trajectory of our business and our platform and how things are moving, I understood that if we had another child, it would really derail a lot of things. It's not to say that things would completely fall apart,
right?
But it would certainly disrupt is probably a good way of describing it. It would disrupt everything that we have going on right now. And I like the way things are. I like the momentum. I like the potential. I like even the tension. I like our home setup, all of it. I kind of like where it is right now. And if that were the case, if we had an unexpected pregnancy, we'd have to be looking for daycare right now, which literally we just celebrated not having to pay or cut that check anymore. And so it's wow, it just popped in my head. I was wow, but that could happen, right?
Yeah.
We're sitting here, playing with fire, that could happen, right? It is a possibility. And so it's something to think about. But again, it's not even just a daycare. It's food. It's insurance, it's flights, it's literally care. And I'm just thinking about just in the last couple of months, the amount of big ticket items or big bills that have come through because we have a third person that we have to take care of. And I was wow, if we had another, that could be really, really expensive. And it would force us to make some decisions that I don't really want to make right now.
Yeah.
Or really ever. For that matter.
Yeah.
And so that was really the leading indicator. It was really a matter of protecting what we've built and kind of honoring what we've built and saying, all right, I think we're good and let's kind of stay where we are.
Yeah. I remember I used to want 5 kids, all boys, stair-stepped in ages. I just wanted a little basketball team. And this was a long time ago, but I guess I just thought I would be pregnant or trying to get pregnant for 10 years. And live happily ever after.
When was this?
This was before I met you. This was a while ago.
Oh, okay.
But I started leaning towards being one and done after we had our son because motherhood, especially in those early days, was really, really hard for me.
Yeah.
And as he's been getting older, it's been even harder for me to imagine starting over.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. I just know how my brain works. And for my own mental health, I knew and still know that one is enough, right? So I do appreciate you kind of sharing that burden because typically men kind of stop at condoms. They'll put on a condom, maybe, but that's really where they stop.
Yeah.
Or use some other creative method that I, won't go into on the podcast. But women,
I told y'all to tell the kids to get out the room.
Yeah.
This is a second reminder. Tell the kids.
Creative methods.
Go outside and play.
Yeah. But typically, women or people with uteruses are responsible for not only tracking our cycles, but possibly taking some sort of hormonal birth control. And if you have a nervous system like mine, that throws a bunch of stuff off.
Yeah.
So you may not choose that option. And ultimately, we're the ones who get pregnant. And so a lot of people probably really want to know about the experience. So can you, I'm hesitant to say paint the picture because you tend to get real graphic, but if you can just kind of paint the picture of what the experience was like. I might chime in with a couple of questions. So give people a sneak peek.
I feel dirty and immature right now. I was like, all right, from soup to nuts. And I was like, no, I don't want to say that. From beginning to end. I was like, I don't know if that's an end from rooter to tutor. No, listen, the process, I'll go even before the procedure, right? So it's a pretty straightforward process. I searched online for a facility and I found one that was nearby, had a good reputation. They had an online form that you basically fill out and you need to submit. It was interesting because typically when I would fill out forms for like any other doctor appointment, it's like you get there and they still want you to fill out more forms. Mm-hmm. This really wasn't the case. It was pretty much like they front loaded all of that stuff. So by the time I got there, it was really just a matter of providing proof of payment for the second half. And that was pretty much it. So let's start there. So in total, the cost was $750 out of pocket. And in terms of finding available dates, it took probably about a few weeks.
Yeah.
I actually thought it was going to be quicker, but from the day that I initially started the search, it took a few weeks before it became available. But pretty much I submitted all my forms. You get the reminder that says, hey, you're still on for the day of your procedure. The morning of, or I think like the day before I get the email, that's when they start giving you a little bit more clarity. So it's like, all right, if your procedure's in the morning, you want to skip breakfast. Mm-hmm. If your procedure is in the evening, you want to skip lunch. Like I was like, all right, well, this is getting real. Like I was like, oh, I can't eat breakfast. Okay. But when I got there, like I said, I checked in, I paid, they called me back. First thing they had me do was empty my bladder, and I went and sat in the room. I will say this, when I got into the room, my mind, and I don't know if it was just nerves, my mind immediately went to that scene in Get Out because it was like a monitor in the room. Oh. And I was like, oh, there's a dude that's about to start talking to me. And that's exactly what happened. Like it was the doctor who was like, hi, my name is, and I was like, oh no. I was
like a pre-recorded thing or like a Zoom?
Pre-recorded video. Where, and it felt like they were just like trying to calm your nerves. Yeah. But also making sure that they checked like the box with any like legal procedures and that sort of thing. So it was like a running list of disclaimers, but they were like trying to give you an idea of what you can expect, how long it'll take, you know, what the healing process would look like. And, you know, there's probably some soft, comfortable music playing in the background. Like it was just like pretty weird. And then after that, a nurse comes in, takes your blood pressure, asks you a few more confirming questions just to like make sure you are who you say you are. Again, it just felt like a lot of like legal hoopla. Then they tell you to take off your clothes from the bottom half down, lay the little white paper blanket kind of thing over you. And then a doctor comes in, walks you through it again. Like, here's what's going to happen. I'm the guy that you just saw on the monitor. And then from there, it's like 15 to 20 minutes. You lean back 15 to 20 minutes. He did turn on some music, which I did appreciate. It was like some classic. What kind of music? It was like 80s soft rock.
Oh, I wonder if that was for him or for you.
I don't know. I'm cool either way. I was like, whatever keeps you
keep them hands steady
is fine with me. You know, when they had like DMX coming out of the speakers, that's a lot. But yeah, it's like 15 to 20 minutes. They do spray. It felt like a giant spritz of.
Oh yeah, like a local numbing spray.
No, not that. It almost felt like, you know, like when you go before they give you a shot, they rub like alcohol or something. Oh yeah, it kind of felt like there was a little bit of that. Again, I'm not telling you what I saw because my eyes were closed. I was looking at the ceiling. I was like, oh God, I don't know what's happening, but I just felt this And it was just like a giant spritz of like some of that stuff. And then they apply the local anesthesia. So again, they do not put you to sleep, because I did get that question. It was like, no, I was awake. They put you to sleep, but they put like the sort of numbing thing down there. And then this is, by the way, the no scalpel vasectomy.
Right.
And then I will say I did feel like a puncture, which.
Like a pinch or a puncture?
Definitely a puncture, not a pinch, because you can feel the breaking of skin. And at that point, he asked to kind of check, and he was like, "Hey, how are you feeling?" I was like, I feel like I'm feeling more than I should be feeling. And so he came in and gave me another round. And after that, it really
another round of anesthesia.
Yeah. And then he was like, "All right, sorry about that." Like, my bad, bro. And then he pretty much did what I don't know what he did.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking. But yeah, a lot of sort of like pressure. Like it kind of felt like I will say this, there was like some manhandling.
Yeah.
And that term like has new meaning even as I'm saying it right now.
Yeah.
But like there was like a lot of like tugging and like pulling and like adjusting and moving. Like I presume he needed to get to something underneath. And so there was almost like, I've got to do these things to sort of make these things more visible. So my mind immediately goes to when you're giving blood and they like slap your hand a little bit to make the vein pop up. He wasn't slapping, but there was like definitely some movement or something. It felt like in order to ensure that they were sort of, doing things as it needed to be.
Was that the most unpleasant part? Was the tugging?
No, the most unpleasant part was the puncture prior to the second anesthesia.
Gotcha.
So that was uncomfortable. But again, that is just like a shot, right? It's just like the first shot. It's like, but once it's in there, you don't really feel it. And then pretty much that was it. Like it felt like, and this is me just sort of responding to what I was hearing. It felt like there was like the tying of things, because I know what like rubber sounds like a rubber glove. So I remember hearing a little bit of that. But like it felt like maybe around 15 minutes. And then that was it. He was like, "All right, you did great. Everything went according to plan." I will say I felt, and there was a little tear. There was a little tear in my eye, and it was only because of like there was a tiny puncture that just kind of felt like, well, I don't know if they went left or right of wherever the anesthesia was like localized, but I definitely felt something, and it was like enough but not enough for me to like scream out loud or anything like that. But it was like, ooh, like that does not feel pleasant. But pretty much that was it. Like it was, I stopped just shy of calling it painful.
Yeah.
Because I reserve the word pain. I've never broken a bone, but it's almost like, like I would say like breaking a bone is probably what I imagine pain to feel like. This was more like just discomfort and uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually got a couple of DMs about your experience from a couple of curious spouses, because a lot of people think that you're pretty immobile afterwards, or it's this super invasive procedure, but it sounds like it's outpatient, and the whole thing from paperwork to the actual puncture, from paperwork to puncture, can be done in under an hour. I think your appointment was at 1:00 and you were calling me by 1:40 to come pick you up. Like I had to cut my Target run short because it was just that quick.
I was actually a little bit upset about that because you had one job.
I know, but I needed to make a return. So, and Target was right next door. So I just felt like I had time to go and browse.
Okay.
Anyway, before we get into the financials, let's talk a little bit about the recovery. What have the last few days been like?
The worst part was probably the first 2 hours afterwards, just because like there was no, like, it's not like I took pain meds or anything like that. So I really needed to go get some ibuprofen, which is what they recommended over Tylenol. And once that settled in, I was fine. I think the combination of that plus the fact that I hadn't eaten all day, I was just like, I got manhandled. I was like, all right, I'm not in a great mood. But like you can walk regularly, like, it was fine. I went upstairs. I think my body immediately started like sending all the energy towards like the wounded area. And so I felt a little fatigued and napped a little bit. But for the most part, I was fine. I will say there is a feeling as a man that you get like whenever you're like kicked in the nuts. Like there was a little bit of that kind of like, not like the initial feeling of getting kicked in the nuts is pain. That's pain.
Yeah.
And that's pain. You heard my voice.
Yeah, it's like you were imagining.
That's pain. That's pain mixed with like queasiness.
Yeah, it like goes to your abdomen.
It feels like it's like stirring up in your stomach. I didn't have the pain part, but I would say about like, I'll put a number on it, like maybe 10 to 20% of that queasiness. So it's like sensitive and like some soreness, but I didn't have any swelling. I didn't have any, because again, I can imagine like that might be scary to see swelling down there. I did not experience that, but they said that was a risk. But yeah, the worst part was the first few hours. Day 2, I was still a little fatigued. I think a lot of that is on me because I was actually feeling better. And I did more than I did the day before, even though I still didn't really do that much. But it was enough for my body to be like, no, bro, you need to go.
Yeah, go sit down.
What did the doctor say? And I'm lucky I had a friend of mine who told me like, hey, you should prepare for that. Even though I was halfway through the day when he told me, he was like, yeah, if you feel better, you should probably still just chill. And so if you're listening, like just chill, watch more
Don't
movies.
Be fooled by the day 2 feeling so much better than day 1.
You know, because I was literally going to go grill something yesterday.
Yeah,
and I was like, yeah, probably not.
You
don't want to
chill,
do
but
that.
damn.
And then today, day 3, I would say, I mean, almost like nothing, right? Like I feel fine. There was slight discomfort, which made me cautious because of my experience on day 2. But by the middle of the day, I was pretty much fine. So I would say recovery. Man, I don't even know that I would call that recovery, but like a day and you'll be fine. But I want to go into why we decided to do this from a financial perspective. And honestly, I don't know that I could say it any more succinctly, but like kids are expensive too. Kids are expensive. I remember reading an article.
Wonderful, but they're expensive.
Love my son more than anything else in the world. He's wildly expensive. I remember years ago reading an article. This is long before I had a kid. And it said that it costs around $250,000. It might have been more than that to raise a child in the United States. And I remember thinking, that doesn't even make sense. That's crazy. Cause like I know, granted I wasn't like adjusting for inflation, but I was thinking about my own experience. And I was like, first of all, my mom did not have $250,000. There's no way if she did, she'd be in like $200,000 debt. Like there's no way. Like in my mind, I was just like, that sounds crazy. But then today, as I started thinking about it, and again, super back of the napkin math, I was like, all right, just daycare alone. $1,500 a month, right? So $18,000 a year. By the way, that $1,500 a month is like right on par with the national average, right? So we live in Atlanta. That's still pretty pricey for Atlanta because we used to send them to a fancy schmancy daycare. But like that's the national average, right? Once you factor in sort of cost of living in other states and cities. Food and groceries, I'd estimate at least, and I feel like I'm lowballing here, but like this is at least $2,500 a year. That sounds super low.
Yeah, it's really low because lunch at school is a little over $3 a day, and breakfast, if you were to eat there, would be like $1.75. We save because he eats at home, but just
I was thinking about it in terms of our monthly grocery bill and the amount that I might attribute to him. But you're right. It's not just that. It's food and groceries at home. It's snacks. Lunch at school. It's snacks. It's restaurants when he comes out to eat with us. It's all of that stuff. Clothes. You buy pretty much all of his clothes. I'd estimate at least $1,000. Yeah. That's probably even small, but
it's right because it's because he's small and he don't know brand names. I can shop straight from the clearance rack and he's fine. I imagine that increases as he gets more opinionated about what he wears.
There's health insurance, premiums, supplemental care, easily $5,000 a year. And then we talk about entertainment again, like not just his entertainment, but like things that we have, like or that we bring him along with, right? So from like outings and food and heck, he goes on vacation with us, like, like it's easily another $4,000. So when you add up all that stuff, like just like in the last year or thinking about the last few years, that's like $30,000 a year. Like it's a lot of money. And obviously, y'all, we could make different choices. And we know that now he goes to a public school. And so we won't have the burden of daycare. But like a lot of that is just going to get replaced by like outings and some of the other stuff. It's not going to be as expensive as what we were paying at daycare. But the point is, it's still expensive. And when I think about that number on an annual basis relative to that stat that I had in my head, I was like, actually, that's pretty accurate. Right. And that also doesn't even include custodial accounts, like income that we get that we pay to him or put into a custodial account for him, which is invested, or 529 contributions for his future educational needs. Like it's a lot of money, right? So like, again, I know the parents out there who are tracking this stuff already know, but if you are just thinking about having the kids and you have not like done the math, like you should, like just that back of the napkin math is real. So if you hear that number and you were like me and you're thinking like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy. That's just what bougie people spend on a kid. I was like, yeah, you can do it for less.
You can.
With
the help of a lot of people. It would be hard to do it alone.
Correct.
For less, right? But if you have active, energetic grandparents, you've got a village, you live in a cul-de-sac with other moms who you can share supplies and carpool and do all that stuff, you can definitely get away with doing it for less, but it is still very expensive. And I think when you frame the $750 medical procedure as a kind of a hedge against a $250,000 expense, it starts to feel more like an investment and not some attack on your manhood or philosophy around children in general. It's just kind of like, this feels like it feels like term life insurance. Like it feels like a no-brainer.
I mean, honestly, I'm going to ruin this, but like it's no different than you being willing to invest in like an alarm system in your home or, some add-on in your yard just to make sure that you don't have the likelihood of some issue downstream, right? So to your point, that's really, I think, the way from a financial perspective, people should be thinking about it.
Yeah. The other thing we can't really ignore is just the number of people that we know personally whose financial plans, retirement, all sorts of things are just thrown off because they had an unexpected pregnancy.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody regrets their children to the extent that they, wish they weren't there, but it certainly leads people to reevaluate their career paths, potentially go back to school in the hopes that they can qualify for better jobs, buy new homes, larger cars, hire professional services. I mean, it's just a domino effect.
It triggers a number of other things, right, that sort of lead to your general lifestyle becoming that much more expensive.
Yeah.
Right. And again, that's after birth. Right. Yeah. So even if we look at it, like just go back to birth. Yeah. And I feel like we spoke about this on another platform, but, I found an article, and according to Bloomberg, the average cost of childbirth is $18,865. So let's just call it $19,000. Now, obviously, a lot of that is going to be covered by insurance, assuming you have insurance. But even the out-of-pocket cost is going to be, according to the article, around $2,854. If you get a C-section, it's closer to $3,200. If there are complications, and I'm talking about minor and or major, you can forget about it. Like you're just like now, even if there aren't complications, there are bills that just show up months later for tests and medications. You guys, if you've ever had any type of medical procedure, you know that all of those things happen pretty regularly. And on top of all of that, there's increased risk for Black women having children in the healthcare system. Black women today are 2 to 3 times more likely to die due to complications during birth than white women. Literally, just last week, one of your cousins passed away after having a child. And again, I'm not saying sad. I thought about this as we got to have a vasectomy. This is something that I'd already known. I'd heard about it. We have family members who have had issues. Thankfully, they've not led to anything serious. But again, when you think about all of those things, and then you think about what men can do, like pay $750 and pop a couple ibuprofen.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's a relatively small price to pay, like given the alternative and the likelihood of some of these like horrible outcomes.
Yeah. And just to put it in context, all of these decisions came after we decided we were done having children. I cannot stress this enough. This is not like a PSA to not have children at all.
Right.
We are 37, going on 38, like in a couple weeks. Happy birthday to me.
Your birthday is coming up.
And 41. Like, we're done. If you're listening to this and you're like 25 and you're over there anxious, like, you've got time to make a decision and you got plenty of inputs that are different than ours that you should account for in your own life. But I do want to go back to the $750 because it's worth noting a few things. The first is that the cost of this procedure is going to vary based on where you get it, what kind you get. So there are different levels. To Julian's point, he got the, what did you call it?
No scalpel.
No scalpel version, but there are other versions where people can be put to sleep and, just depends on what you want. And it matters whether your insurance covers it. So unlike hormonal birth control for people with uteruses, vasectomies are not federally mandated to be covered 100% by insurance companies. So with birth control, it's federally mandated that insurance companies have to cover that. With this, they don't have to. However, most will still cover it or at least offer some sort of partial coverage, but you'd have to ask your provider and anticipate needing to jump through some hoops, like possibly getting a referral letter or something from your primary care physician before you could just call and schedule the procedure. Now, we decided to pay out of pocket because we have a high deductible health insurance plan, which means basically we take a lower monthly premium in exchange for paying more upfront or a higher deductible before insurance kicks in for most specialized services. So things like our checkups, all that stuff is covered. But if you wanted something extra, you would have to come out of pocket significantly more before insurance kicks in. But because we're willing to have a high deductible health insurance plan, we have access to a health savings account, which is also called an HSA, which is basically a triple taxed advantage account that allows us to save and invest money that can later be used on qualified health expenses. So we've had an HSA for 6 or 7 years-ish and contribute to it every month. So we have a savings account for medical expenses like this one or unexpected expenses that may come later in life. So long story short, the cost was going to come out of pocket anyway because of our insurance plan, even if we had gone through the company. So we figured why not just pay it and reimburse ourselves at a later date. So I actually looked up the average price of a vasectomy if you're not using insurance, and it's right around the $1,000 mark. There's obviously a range. Some sites said up to $3,000. I'm guessing that's for like the Hashitashi version. But again, sometimes it can be completely free if you're using a program that covers it, like Medicaid or some other insurance provider.
Yeah, so I didn't mention that. That's actually a really good point because one of the reasons why mine was only $750 is because they offered discounts for people who were willing to come into the office on certain days. So I think they have higher demand dates. But in my case, I think if I could schedule it on a Monday or Tuesday, there was like a $100 discount.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so that was one of the interesting things. Now, along those lines, I will say, and I don't have data to support this, but I've seen enough articles about this just as I was leading into having my procedure done, is that like the fundamentals of supply and demand, I would imagine, will also likely impact pricing for vasectomies. And so before Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was not a wait list for this procedure. But since then, there have been a number of men around the country, around the world, really, that have all of a sudden felt like this is something that they should be doing and in solidarity of women's rights. And so all of that has led to longer lines, longer periods of time in which people can actually find appointments. And so if this is going to work like anything else in this country, it is going to be sort of beholden to the laws of economics. And so when you have a lot of people who are waiting, you're oftentimes going to see an impact on pricing. So it would not surprise me if that price goes up considerably over the next couple of years, or if options become available for men to sort of get expedited services at a premium. Because again, more people are asking questions, and that's really just how the world works, or at least here in America. So So yeah, we could talk about this at length for a pretty long time. I feel like now's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
I feel like we've done a pretty good job of not going too raunchy, too immature.
Not too detailed. You didn't talk about the smell or nothing.
Nuts. Yeah. There is a smell which did not come from my body odor. But yeah, you know what happens when heat is applied to certain areas. So like, you know, you will catch a whiff of some things, which is normal. But you know, that's one of the things I wish I
said you didn't talk about the smell, and then you went on.
Triggered it. I thought about it. I was like, you know what? There certainly was a smell. But I was gonna say, like, he may have mentioned that in the video, but at that point, I was already in the sunken place. Yeah. So like, I didn't know what was going to happen. Because I was like, why wouldn't you say that? He might have. He might have said it 3 times, but I wouldn't know, which is why they say it 3-4 times. So all of that to say, it was fine. Yeah. I'm fine. And hopefully if you get one, you're fine too. So hopefully this helps you to consider vasectomies again as a part of your financial plan. It's certainly worthy of consideration. And final thoughts.
Yeah. So final thoughts. I think I have a couple, but I'm gonna try and play it like it's one.
Final thoughts
is that we need more men to talk about this, right? Because when it comes to things like diversifying your portfolio or assessing a stock, dudes absolutely understand the need to control for volatility and invest based off of their risk tolerance. But when it comes to the risk of an unwanted pregnancy, it's like they lose this sense of what they can do to mitigate against it because it likely conflicts with an identity or some other, you know, psychological factor. And I was honestly so pleased to see all of the confessionals in the comment section on Instagram and Facebook and this brotherhood that was forming around like, best decision ever. Yeah, I got mine in 2014. And even just like rallying around innocent questions like, hey man, did it hurt? Like just being able to describe it and support each other was really good. So I challenge our male listeners or even our female listeners or wherever you identify as to share this episode. If you've had one or you have one scheduled or you're thinking about one, share this episode with your homies and just use it to start the conversation. You might be surprised about what you learn.
So I love that. And let me also say in a response to your final thought, I didn't receive a single private message.
Really?
Not one.
I got
It's been 3 days.
15.
And so as much as we are thinking that this podcast or this conversation needs to be had by men, I'm just telling you 100%, not a single man sent me a DM or a text. In fact, the only person that sent me a DM or a text was someone who'd already had one and was giving me advice on how to make sure that I continue to rest on day 2.
Yeah.
So I would say that there are just as many women who are unfamiliar with this process.
Yeah, I got a couple
and need to
asking
wrap
us to
their
record.
heads around it, but it's not been men. So to that point, my final thought is when we think about this podcast and what we really always wanted it to be, and even how we describe it, it's like life at the intersection of money. And I think this is a great example of that. And when I think about what I want all of our content to do, it's to be memorable and to be a point of reference that moves people to take action. And I think that this is exactly the type of content and conversation that we want to help inspire. More specifically, when I think about what men can do to help prevent an unwanted pregnancy, I mean, this is obviously something that needs to be a part of the conversation. But even when we think about the actual cost, and I keep saying it here in Atlanta, it was $750. If you would have asked me how much I thought it would have cost, I probably would have said like closer to $2,000.
Yeah.
Like I would not have had any point of reference. And so it's only $750. Like I know guys who squander that, you know, on toys, like nothing, you know what I mean? So it is a small price to pay, relative to, as we've gone over some of the, outcomes with respect to having a child or any of the complications that may exist from having a child. And so our hope is that this podcast is the fulfillment of our mission, which is to inspire better conversations about money, not just talking about money, but talking about how it sort of intersects with life, and in this case, masculinity and vasectomies. So.
Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast presented by Success. We've talked a lot about vasectomies today, but right now the ball is in your court.
Well played. Well played. I was
if
going to
you
say
like
go
what
nuts.
You heard,
Go
there we go.
Nuts on the ratings and reviews.
If you like what you heard, go nuts on the ratings and review page and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Hate to cut this short, but we will see you next week. I don't know why. I don't know.
Doing too much.
See y'all next week.